the Biden administration just like really screwed up our immigration policy in a profoundly dangerous way.
But even if you agree that immigration is a problem, it seems division is the most compelling narrative for politicians. I remember this particular quote about the black community where he said, "What do you have to lose?" I'm a black man. I feel like I've got things to lose. And my concern is when the Western narrative is that it's the brown people that are the reason that your life is hard, or like Mexicans and murderers. If I heard that from my political leaders, it's conceivable that I might be angry at my neighbor, even though they've done nothing.
But let me just say, very often what the president is accused of saying, he didn't say it, or there was much greater context.
You wouldn't have said that.
But I think, well, the president and I certainly have way different styles. But Donald Trump is much different as a human being than the media makes him out to be.
But back in 2016, there was a private message between you and a roommate where you said Trump was either a cynical arsehole or America's Hitler. How do you go from that position to vice president of the same person? What is that journey?
A crazy journey, man. But look, I thought Donald Trump would be a failed president. He was not. I thought that America's institutions were fundamentally functioning. They were not. You always have to be able to acknowledge when you're right and when you're wrong. Like, he's so non-conventional in the way that he does everything that things that were previously unimaginable are actually on the table. This peace deal with Iran, for example.
But there's been lots of false deals.
Well, this one's real, so.
And Israel. Trump called Netanyahu a very difficult guy. What does Netanyahu want?
I don't know. Well, what I would say is that we're different countries with different interests.
Do you trust them?
I don't really trust anybody. But having seen the President of the United States operate, I feel quite confident that they are the junior partner, we're the senior partner, we are the world's superpower.
I'm going to take a little bit of a hard turn. Do you think aliens could be real?
I do.
Mr. Vice President, I had no idea about your earliest context. And it has informed what I've then seen from you later as an adult. But can you take me back? The emotion's still right on the surface for you.
Very much so.
This is super interesting to me. My team give me this report to show me how many of you that watch this show subscribe. And some of you have told us, according to this, that you are unsubscribed from the channel randomly. So, favour to ask all of you, please could you check right now if you've hit the subscribe button, if you are a regular viewer of the show and you like what we do here. We're approaching quite a significant landmark on this show in terms of a subscriber number. So if there was one simple free thing that you could do to help us, my team, everyone here, to keep this show free, to keep it improving year over year and week over week, it is just to hit that subscribe button and to double check if you've hit it. Only thing I'll ever ask of you. Do we have a deal? If you do it, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make sure every single week, every single month, we fight harder and harder and harder and harder to bring you the guests and conversations that you want to hear. I've stayed true to that promise since the very beginning of the Diary of a CEO, and I will not let you down. Please help us. Really appreciate it. Let's get on with the show. Mr. Vice President, I have your book here.
Okay.
And it says, of all the things that I hated about my childhood, nothing compared to the revolving door of father figures. I hated the disruption, and I hated how often these boyfriends would walk out of my life just as I began to like them. I always think to understand the people that are sat in front of me, you have to get a picture of their early context.
Sure.
And I had no idea about your earliest context. And it has in some respects informed what I've then seen from you later as an adult. But can you take me back
to
your earliest context and explain that quote for me?
Yeah, so I was raised in a very working class town, very working class family. Yeah, this is a photo of me when I was a little kid here. And my family, like a lot of other families in similar circumstances, we struggled. We struggled to adapt to middle class life. Yeah, this is my sister and my grandfather. It's interesting, my grandfather had very low formal education. He graduated from high school. My grandmother actually left school when she was 13. Very religious people, particularly my grandmother. But, you know, they struggled pretty much economically for most of their lives. My grandfather died when I was 13. I think my grandmother died when I was 20. And, you know, this is probably not even a year before she died. And I was about to go to Iraq, and she was very old and frail. And this is one of the last photos of the two of us. And this is really the woman who raised me, because you raised the revolving door of father figures. So mom, amazing person. She's been clean and sober for now 11 years. But she was in the throes of a pretty bad addiction problem for much of my childhood. And so this was kind of my savior. This was the person who stepped in and made sure I had a stable life to the extent that I did.
And your grandmother, she got pregnant at 13.
Correct.
And she had a miscarriage at that age?
Yeah, that's right. So think about this. Eastern Kentucky, you're talking about the hills, of an extremely impoverished, very rural part of the United States of America. And so, she is dating my grandfather, who I think at the time is 16. She's 13. So these are children. She gets pregnant. They move to Ohio for more opportunity because you just couldn't build a good life for yourself. There weren't enough good jobs in that part of the world. And she had a miscarriage. So like the thing that brought her out of her home, I think hastened them getting married. I don't think they would have gotten married at 13 and 16 were it not for this unplanned pregnancy. She was kind of in it then. So they're married. They have a very chaotic marriage, an abusive marriage in a lot of ways, but they have 3 kids, my mom, my uncle, my aunt. And the story of our family is in some ways, some of us were able to kind of break the cycle and some of us weren't. And part of what motivated me to write that book was trying to understand why is it that life worked out for some of us and didn't work out for others.
So your biological father?
Yeah.
He put you up for adoption.
So he did. So I was adopted by a man when I was 5 or 6 years old by the name of Robert Hamill. And he became, and is still technically, if you look at my birth certificate, he is still listed as my legal father. Now he was in the picture from, call it, I was 7 until 10 or 11. And then he and mom got divorced. He still stuck around for a little bit after that. But by the time I was 12 years old, he was just gone. Never talked to him again, never saw him again. And
am I right in thinking this is the third man in your life at this point? Because your sister, Lindsay, comes from a different father.
That's right. So her father, a very good guy. She's 5 or 6 years older than me. And so he was the first of my mother's husbands. And then my dad, my biological father, was number 2. And then my legal father was number 3. And then, things sort of got a little quicker from that point forward. So there was more turnover, let's say, in the relationships at that point forward.
There was also a guy called Matt thereafter at 13 years old that your mum had met.
Yeah. Good guy. Very close to him. He actually is very political. And so he and I reconnected a little bit over our shared interest in politics, but he was just a good, hardworking guy. He was only around for maybe a few years, probably less than that of my life, but he was a significant and positive force.
In your book, page 124, you say living with mum and Matt, which is when you were 14 years old, was like a front row seat to the end of the world.
Yeah. Well, it was just chaotic, right? I mean, things that I thought of as normal that I later realized in, talking to my wife or talking to friends, that just a level of relationship instability. Fighting, people throwing stuff. If the fights get really bad, some person throws a plate at somebody else. Again, it sounds, even talking about it now, kind of crazy, but it was pretty normal back then. And, sometimes it was worse and sometimes it was better, but there was a sense in which relationships were always just kind of chaotic.
As an adult, like you can almost imagine now that you've got so many kids yourself that
yeah.
I can understand the feeling of craziness being normal, and you kind of don't realize until you see into someone else's world or someone else hears about yours. Because I can relate to that in many ways. But as an adult, you must look back on that and now see the way that shaped you. Yeah.
Well, it was very unhealthy. I certainly think, again, it was hard to sort of really feel a sense of stability. It was hard to really attach to people because you always assumed that they were going to be gone. And, years later, I was actually at a conference. I was giving a speech and this guy came up to me and he was a child psychologist. And, he said, one of the things the literature shows is that people who come from traumatic or chaotic environments and end up doing pretty well, they always have one person, whether it was a teacher, a social worker, a grandparent, aunt or an uncle. They always have one person who's sort of their anchor. And that seems to be the difference for a lot of these kids. And again, I was lucky enough to have that. And I think about my life a lot of time. I mean, sitting here, I'm the Vice President of the United States. What would my life have turned out to be if you had all that chaos, which was just a background part of my life, but you take out those stabilizing forces? God knows, man.
Your grandmother.
God knows. My grandmother. That's right.
Because through your story, when I was reading about your childhood, she seemed like the safe place that you would retreat
Correct.
to over and over again.
I was obviously, I think it's very important for boys to have male role models, to have father figures that they look up to. She was in an unconventional way, like both a mother figure and a father figure. She was extraordinarily odd. And I mean that in the most loving way possible, but she was just incredibly tough. I I don't know, 12, 13. I was hanging out with one of the kids in the neighborhood who was kind of going down a bad path. He actually would later spend some time in jail, but he was getting into drugs, starting to smoke weed, starting to do a little bit more than that. Again, 12, 13. So we were pretty young kids. My grandmother found out, and she told me that if I kept on hanging out with this kid, she was going to run him over with her car. And then I was like kind of caught off guard by that. And she said, JD, I promise you, and no one will ever find out about it. And I was like, whoa. So like for the sake of this kid, I pretty much stopped hanging out with him. But that toughness, I think, was like a necessary part. It was like through sheer willpower that she kept me on the straight and narrow. And again, I don't know where I'd be without her.
And over the next sort of couple of decades, your mother's addiction seems to get worse and worse.
It does. It does.
From prescription drugs to heroin.
Correct.
And everything in between. And it really sort of ravages not just her life, but the family's life.
That's right.
Nearly making your grandparents bankrupt.
Yes. And Mom, by the way, has been clean and sober for 11 years, which is an amazing thing. But, when Papaw died, he was what my grandmother was for me. I sort of realized that that's what Papaw was for Mom. He was her safe place. He was her anchor. And I think she already had some addiction problems, but it just really accelerated from there. And things kind of went off the rails. And, my grandparents, before my grandfather died, were trying various ways to help her. And yeah, it got worse and worse, harder and harder drugs, had a few bad overdoses. And, by the grace of God, some miracle, it's amazing how transformed she is. And it sort of drives home how, for some people, drugs are just, they take so much away from a human being. And she was certainly that way. And in the same way that they took so much away from her, sobriety has given her a whole lot back.
If I asked your wife,
yeah,
how this season of your life, the most formative season of your life,
sure,
has changed you, what are all the things she would say? It's funny because I remember interviewing, I think it was Michael Jordan's coach.
Okay.
And he said to me that people's dark sides and their light sides are like fundamentally interconnected.
Yes.
And I can relate.
Absolutely.
That the things people might clap for or applaud about you are also fundamentally linked to the things that you struggle with or that make you sometimes not the most normal person.
Yes. That makes total sense to me. I think on the dark side, what she would say is, I am an extraordinary mistrust. I think of people that I don't know particularly well. I sort of assume the worst sometimes about circumstances and things outside of my control, but I maybe assume the best about the people themselves, right? So there's an inherent sense that the world is going to fall apart. I think that's a very true thing. I mean, even in our marriages, it would be hard to imagine. I'm not saying, all marriages are work, but it would be hard to imagine like a marriage that was more successful and more happy than ours. Our kids are doing great. They're healthy. Like my wife and I love each other very much, but we're also just like, she really is my best friend. She's the person I talk to about everything. She's my closest confidant. And yet there are all kinds of times during our 12-year marriage where I've just had this thought, like, there's no way this is going to last. Either because she's taking the kids to the grocery store and I start thinking to myself, oh my God, a drunk driver is going to have a head-on collision. There's a sense of like instability that is very much built in. That's kind of the dark. I think the light is because I've seen a lot of people at their very best and their very worst. I sort of assume the best about the human beings themselves. So even though the circumstances are crazy and even though shit hits the fan, sometimes completely outside of your control, I think what she would say is that I probably have a higher empathy quotient than any person that she knows. Mm-hmm. And I really try to understand what makes people tick. And so there's the light and the dark together, but there's a lot beyond that. I mean, look, it was a lot of work. When I look back at our early relationship and we'd have an argument, like before we were married, and I'd be like, okay, well, fine, let's just break up. And her response is like, well, that's crazy. Why would we break up? Let's just like have a rational conversation. I'm like, honey, I don't do rational conversations in this context. That is not something we do. But again, so long as you're, I think, self-aware about that, it's a problem that you can solve. And certainly, I think she would say now compared to 14 years ago when we first started dating, it's just night and day. But very early on, it was a chaotic relationship itself.
Clearly an avoidant attachment style, which obviously makes a
100%,
ton of sense. Yeah.
100%, yeah.
I can relate. And
I didn't have the vocabulary to describe that, but that's exactly what that was.
Did you have to go to like couples therapy? Because it seems almost inconceivable that you could go through that early context, be so avoidant, be so sort of on edge with commitment and see everything as kind of being ephemeral, yet still have a healthy relationship like the one you have with her.
No, never went to couples therapy. I actually went to like therapy a couple of times, and I just found it way too uncomfortable to talk to a stranger. And so,
is this uncomfortable?
No. I mean, I guess this is kind of a weird kind of therapy, but no, it's just the idea. The other thing I really didn't like about it, and again, I don't mean this to criticize therapy. I'm sure it helps a lot of people. So please don't take this the wrong way. But there was something about it that felt almost too self-referential and too like it almost encouraged at least me to blame others or to blame my past or to blame my mom or to blame I really didn't like this feeling that I was sort of giving up agency over my own life. And so we've just gotten better at how we relate to each other. That's primarily me. I mean, she grew up in a very stable situation. So her parents are South Asian immigrants to the United States of America, but she was born and raised in San Diego, California. Just very normal middle-class Southern California life. And I think because of that, she just had much healthier relationship practices than I did.
That point about understanding the person on the other end and having empathy for the human being, politics.
Yeah.
Appears to be almost exact. Because I watch the election campaigns. I watch how like yourself and the president went against, people like Kamala Harris.
Sure.
So you must, with that logic, think that Kamala Harris is actually like a really good person. Like you must understand Kamala. I wouldn't say that I understand her. I would say that I just don't have this animosity towards people on the other side. But is that not like sort of implicit in the job itself that you have to point out their faults? And
you do. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think you can be sort of rational about it. You can be cerebral about it. Certainly there are things the other side does that annoy me, but like my fundamental bias is that just most people are good people. And to the extent that they do something you disagree with, it's either because they screwed up on something or because they made a mistake I've always been like this. I've always been more charitable about other human beings. And I don't know, again, maybe I do that too much. Maybe I'm too charitable, but I'd rather be too charitable than too cynical about human beings. Cause you talk about a screwed up perspective to take into politics. If you're always cynical about other people's motivations, man, you're going to be in a very, very bad spot.
I actually think the same about interviewing, remarkably, because
absolutely.
I meet so many people from so many different
sides. Of course.
And one of the things that I've come to learn is just try and meet everybody as I experience them versus especially when I'm interviewing politicians, I just want to meet them as I experience them versus thinking about how they've been framed or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's actually made me much more empathetic because, again, obviously we all have preconceptions. And then you meet someone and you go, oh, they are a family person. They care about X, Y, and Z. They care about the same things. They just disagree about pathways.
Yeah, of course.
But politics seems to be like, the sort of game of politics to me seems to be like paint the other side to be malicious.
Well, I think the game of politics, fundamentally you're making a pitch to people, right? It's not about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or JD Vance or Tim Walz. It's about the American people, right? And fundamentally to make that sales pitch, you have to say what's better about this product, what's worse about the other product. Mm-hmm. So that is just inherent. But again, I think you can do that. What I always try to do is I try to talk about here are the policies that are really bad. Here are the reasons why I think this is screwed up. Here are the reasons why I think that she made mistakes. But it is weird. It is fundamentally you are in a position where you're trying to point out the faults in another people, even if it's just their conduct as opposed to their character. But even with that, I do think that you see people in politics who fundamentally just really hate the people on the other side.
Yeah.
That's just not me. It's never going to be me. Even when I'm being very pugilistic, like even when you really have to drive home a point, like not to get too much into the weeds of partisan politics, but like something I think the Biden administration just like really screwed up in a profoundly dangerous way was our immigration policy, right? Now, there are all kinds of reasons why that might have happened, but fundamentally that was a very, very, very bad screw up. But I don't hate Kamala Harris because I think she had a bad immigration policy. I just think it's important to point out the flaws.
on the immigration policy, I mean,
Yeah.
I've still got to go through your childhood here, but on this point of immigration, this is another area where you get such division.
Sure.
And you get, I remember watching there was a couple of things I remember watching when I think I was probably back in Plymouth, in the countryside. One of them was like Trump, the president, demonizing Mexican people and brown people. I remember this particular quote, which I've always struggled with a little bit, where he said about the black community, "What have you got to lose?" And I remember thinking, I'm a black man. I feel like I've got things to lose. That kind of narrative about those individuals, that broad strokes sort of demonization of them, would make people's lives harder and feels unnecessary. Even if you agree that immigration is a problem, the sort of like skin color or religion or like Mexicans, rapists and murderers might galvanize in the near term, but in the long term is probably going to sow division. And that's probably net negative for society.
Well, one thing I'd say just about anything that I've ever heard the president say that's then refracted through the lens of social media or, non-social media is very often what he is accused of saying. He didn't say it, or he said it in a totally different way, or there was much greater context. So I remember, for example, back in 2016 or 2015, whenever he said this, sort of being like offended at the rapists and murderers line.
Yeah.
And then I went and looked at what he said, and what he said, which is actually true, is that some of these countries are actually encouraging prisoners to come into the United States of America. Does that mean that every person comes into America as a rapist or a murderer or as a prisoner? No, it doesn't. But he didn't say that. Right. So again, this goes back to the point about being charitable is I do try to understand fundamentally, like, why did a person say that? Mm-hmm. What are they actually thinking? What are they trying to get across? And again, if you disagree with that, that's fine.
You wouldn't have said that.
But I think, well, the president and I certainly have way different styles. Absolutely. We have different styles. But I mean, the way that I talk about immigration, I'd say that's one of the issues where we've always been like extremely closely aligned. And that was obviously a major issue during the 2024 campaign. But the way that I think about immigration is fundamentally like, as a country, you are the people who live in your nation. Okay. So America's 330 million souls, I think again, most of them, whether they voted for me or not, they're really good people, and they want really good things for their families. They want really good things for themselves. And yeah, there are like some bad apples in every crew, 330 million people. There are definitely some bad people, but most people are fundamentally good and decent. However, you could let people into your country who could be fun, decent, normal human beings who just kind of mess with the equation a little bit. It's like if I have a bunch of people over to my house for dinner and I invite 10 people to come over for dinner and one of them brings a stranger, it's probably going to be fun, right? But if like every single one of them bring 3 strangers, it's going to totally change the character of the conversation that you're going to have, of the room that you're going to have. A country is like that, just on a much more massive scale. So I maybe come at it or I describe it a different way, but fundamentally, I think that the president was very right about immigration in a way that was prescient. And even if the blunt way that he described it offended some people, I think it was like a very important contribution to not just our country, but to the world.
I think it would be hard to find an American who didn't think we needed, again, I'm not an American, so I guess I'm talking about where I'm from, but we needed borders and a policy around borders.
Sure.
Just in the same way that we have it around our house and every festival we enjoy and whatever venue we go to. I think the thing I've always been concerned about when I see the sort of rising narrative across the world, not just in America, but now across the West, the UK as well, is in trying to solve that problem, it seems that like division is the most compelling narrative for politicians. And then the like downstream consequence of division, you see playing out on the streets. You see like, especially in the UK at the moment, you're really seeing certain communities be quite demonized and victimized because of this broad political narrative, which is being used to get people into power. But then the downstream consequences of like real people on the streets that are brown or black or Muslims is like, I don't think the people at the top consider that.
Well, I mean,
is there another way of making the point on immigration, legal immigration, without demonizing people?
Well, I certainly, when I talk about it, to the extent that I demonize anybody on the immigration conversation, I demonize the leadership that is immune to thinking about the consequences of this. And so just this point about division. Division is a very interesting word to me because I think division is very bad. Like I like living in a community that's cohesive, where people get along, where we love everybody, regardless of what they look like or what thoughts they might have in their head. But like, let me give you like a slightly different perspective on the division thing. what if division is not the result of politicians demonizing certain groups, but what if division is the inevitable consequence of when the population changes too quickly, too fast in a given society? And what you see as, politicians exploiting division, I actually think that what they're trying to do is articulate a feeling that people have. And sometimes people might express that feeling in ways that we don't like, or maybe they're offensive, but fundamentally, let's just say you're a working class guy in Britain, or you're a working class guy in the United States of America, and, somebody moves in your neighborhood.
That's
okay.
right. I did.
Yeah.
So my black family, my family's
Sure.
obviously black. My mum's Nigerian.
Okay.
And I came from Botswana, and I moved into an all-white neighborhood.
Okay. And how did people treat you?
We were called the N-word a couple of times. And,
that's terrible. I don't like that. But I imagine that a lot of people in your community were welcoming,
they were. For sure.
Okay.
But as a kid, you only remember the ways you stand out.
No, of course. That can be and I understand that. And I certainly think it's important to try to fight back against that stuff. We don't want young kids who come into a community for that to be their memory. But I also, our next door neighbor was black family, and my grandmother was not woke. She did not have progressive views about race or gender or pretty much anything else. But she really loved, I'll never forget this, the black man who lived next door to us. She said he has a good heart, and that was her highest compliment of anybody. Mm-hmm. He was a preacher. The family was a very, very good family, stable family, mom, dad, a few kids. And I was very close to the young son. And I did not experience that. When people talk about division, I just did not see that family as substantially different from us. And I don't think that family, I'm sure they experienced racism, but I don't think that was a common fixture of their day living in that neighborhood. Now,
that's fair.
Where Mammal really did resist the changes is when we had a few people, the neighborhood went downhill very quickly. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. And you had a bunch of people move in with different habits. And you had a woman who, she set a bath, but then she got drunk and passed out. And so she ruined her entire house. And, at some level, was it wrong for my grandmother to feel offended that her neighborhood had changed so quickly, so fast, that she didn't feel comfortable there anymore? Or the people who came in had different values, or she couldn't hold a conversation with somebody in the same way. I got attacked on this during the campaign in 2024 when I said, it's actually okay if you're an American, an English native speaker. It's actually okay for you to want the person who moves in next to you to speak English. Not because you're a racist or a xenophobe, but because you want to be able to talk to the person you share a community with. And so what I often see is that division gets magnified when statesmen don't do the job of actually ensuring that integration is possible. And for integration to be possible, it has to be, I think, slow moving. You have to be careful, right? 100 people moving into a community is different from 10 people moving into a community. You have to make sure that everybody has economic opportunities, right? It's one thing to welcome a newcomer when everybody has access to a good job, but you welcome a newcomer when a lot of people are feeling economically distressed. They're going to react to it totally differently. So again, this is maybe me being charitable to people you think I shouldn't be charitable to, but fundamentally, my job as an elected leader is to create the kind of environment where division happens less. It's not to pretend that division doesn't exist. People naturally, I think, feel reactive when things change too quickly, and that's okay.
No, I understand the sort of human instinct of I guess of kind of xenophobia in a way. And I think we all would want our neighbor to be able to connect with our neighbor.
Yeah.
I think it's the point of nuance is when they can't speak my language, what do I then do about that? And I think, maybe if my neighbor didn't speak my language, we might not get along because we wouldn't be able to connect and talk. But I wouldn't be angry at them. And my concern is from a high level when the sort of Western narrative now is that it's the brown people that are the reason that your life is hard, if I believed that, if I heard that from my political leaders, it's conceivable that I might be angry at my neighbor, even though they've done nothing. Just their presence alone might make me resent them a little bit. And then what happens when I resent them? Because I'm being told that they're the reason that I'm suffering. They're the reason I don't have a job. And then we get into these culture wars which is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I've always wondered.
I hear you. But what I would say is I'm not mad, and I said this on the campaign trail all the time. I'm not mad at the illegal alien who broke our laws and came into the country. Probably some of them probably didn't even know they were breaking our laws, who came into our country and wanted better opportunity for their families. What I am mad is the political system. I don't know, right? So it's hard to say. But I am mad at the political system that encourages people to break those rules and sows division, and then gets mad at the native population for looking around and saying, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't agree to this. So I just, like, I don't know what you describe that. I would say there's an instinct in every human being to want to share a community with people where you've got something in common with. Okay. And it's like everything, right? A little bit of spice is good. Too much spice changes the dynamic a little bit. And I think most people, they're okay with change, but change that happens too fast, too quickly, I think in an immigration context is very, very bad for a country. And I think you guys have had that. We've had that. A lot of European countries have had that. I don't even feel particularly angry at any country because it's a mistake that all of us made. But now that you see that, I mean, you rightly call it division. I just think that we have to say, wait a second, let's try to do things a slightly different way.
I think algorithms also play a big role in that because of the design.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's probably another conversation. I do think though, if my family were struggling or at all in danger or at risk, and there was an area of land over there that offered them a better chance, I personally think for the sake of my family, if my family was struggling, I would try and move my family into that area. And I assume you would do the same. I assume you would, if your family, I've got this wonderful photo of your kids and your wife, where if America went to catastrophe and Mexico was doing great, would you not try and get into Mexico even if it wasn't, you didn't have a visa?
I don't think I would. I mean, I can understand why some people have to like move. You need to eat, you need to provide for your family. But, I think that this is another thing about the immigration thing that is challenging is, you want people to feel a certain rootedness and a certain devotion to their country. One of the things that's very unique about America compared to Europe is there's this poll question that went around when I was a teenager, maybe when I was in my early 20s, and it asked what percentage of young people in that society would die for their country if they had to. Like, I'm not excited about the idea, but would actually do it. In the United States, it was something like 70%. And in all the other Western countries, it was like 20 to 35%. And so, you talk about like, okay, moving to Mexico because there's economic opportunity in a universe where Mexico's flourishing and America's struggling. I get what you're saying, that you want people to move and migrate to the place where they can have a chance of feeding their family. But like, I love this place in a way that is totally independent of the economic opportunities it provides to my children. There's something much deeper, and there's a connection to the places,